Welcome back. I want to spend a little bit of time here talking about a couple that came into the office here recently that I think a lot of people could relate to. This couple, I'm going to name them Bob and Terry. They were both 64 years old and they had been working for 30, 35 plus years, and they had accumulated this nice nest egg that they were thinking about transitioning into retirement. So what they were doing is they wanted to come in and talk to me. It was their first time actually meeting with a financial advisor, and they wanted to talk to me about how could I help them to reallocate their investment options into something that's geared a little more towards retirement. They had both been in one of the target date funds that was, I think it was a target date 2020 fund. And what that means is typically it's a mutual fund that's set up for someone that should be retiring in the year 2020. So that's called a target date fund. So both Bob and Terry had a target date 2020 fund, and they came in to see me because they still see every month the value of their accounts going up and down with the market. So they said, Dustin, we just don't feel like this investment portfolio fits what our needs are anymore. It's helped them to gather this nice nest egg. They'd accumulated a little over $1 million, and they wanted to really make sure that money was there in 2 or 3 years once they were actually going to go ahead and move that into retirement. So they brought in their different investment options, and both 401ks had about 20 or maybe 22 different options inside of their 401ks. So what I was doing is I was going through and I was looking at what are the fees going on inside of those mutual funds. I was looking at the level of risk that each one of those mutual funds had, and what I found was that the majority of the mutual funds in both of their portfolios were geared towards one thing, and that's growth. Typically, I mean, any 401k plan that's out there is usually set up to help the employees to save enough money to retire. Well, once you get close to retirement, your goals are going to change. Now it's not necessarily how much risk are we going to take, how much can we grow this portfolio. Now the objectives are, how do we keep this money? We've worked our lives to accumulate this nest egg. How do we wrap our arms around that money and make sure it's there 20, 30 years from now? So after I studied all their different options, I let them know what I found, and I said, hey, you know, you've either got a money market account, which is basically almost like sitting in cash. I mean, it may earn a 0.5%, or if you're lucky, 0.75%. So it was one of those, or maybe a couple of different bond funds that they had. Now, bond funds, we'll typically use those as a diversifying tool, but what's happened are bond funds are highly interest rate sensitive. And what I mean by that is you can kind of think of bond funds and interest rates like they're on a teeter-totter. And what happens when interest rates go down, that causes bond funds to go up in value. When interest rates go up, that causes bond funds to go down in value. Well, if you think about it right now, interest rates, I know they went up a little bit, but interest rates are still right around all-time lows. I mean, they're very, very low if you look at historical averages. So guess where that puts bond funds? That puts them right around their all-time highs. Matter of fact, if you're holding bond funds, this recent interest rate hike that we saw probably caused those funds to lose a little bit of money. So right now is not necessarily the time to use a bond fund as your safety net. So when I looked through their portfolio, I found they've got either growth mutual funds, they've got a money market account, which is basically like sitting in cash, and then they had a bond fund account, which right now is still sitting around their peak. So they're much more likely to go down in value than they are to go up in value at this point. So that's not going to be something we want to use as our safety net. So what we did is we went ahead and called both of their employers, and we asked if their plan would allow for something called an in-service rollover. And what that means, what an in-service rollover is, since they both wanted to work for another 2 or 3 or maybe 4 years, they didn't want to go ahead and close their 401k plan because they're getting a match. Both of them were getting a 4 or 5, I can't recall now, 4 or 5% match from their employers. So they definitely didn't want to give that up. So we called and we found out that their plan allows that in-service rollover, where they keep that plan in service, keep funding it for the next 3 or 4 years, getting their match, but they allowed us to roll over the balance of that 401k into an IRA plan. Now, when this happens, when you roll it to an IRA, there's not going to be any taxes due. There's not going to be anything that happens that's negatively going to impact the 401k. What it does is it allows your investment options to go much, much more broad. Now they're not limited to those 20 or 22 different investments that we were looking at. Now they can start really setting this portfolio up so that they're going to have some guaranteed results throughout their retirement. What that allowed them to do is really reduce the level of risk, reduce the level of fees, and start generating some income-producing assets that they can leverage throughout their retirements. So if you're currently contributing into a 401k plan, that is great. That's certainly better than not having anything at all. But you definitely want to check with your employer just so that you understand your options, understand what you're allowed to do with your 401k and what you're not allowed to do. Because it's certainly, if you're within 5 to 10 years of retirement, you want to start thinking about some other options. So give us a call at our office if you have any questions about this topic.